Well, hello back. This is Ramy Romany, your iFit guide, and today we are here in the center of the pyramid's plateau. Menkaure Raj right here, the small pyramid, Khafre the middle pyramid, and Khufu, the Great Pyramid of Giza. In today's workout, we're going to walk right in the center on the causeway that used to lead straight to the Nile in the ancient times. And by the end of this workout, we're going to land between the paws of the Sphinx. So Khafre, that middle pyramid right next to me, is a part of a complex, like each of them is. A part of a complex that only ends with the pyramid as the tomb for the king. And the rest of the complex is a funerary temple that is right next to the pyramid, where the body of the king would come right to, and towards the end of the prayers, they will take him up into the pyramid. But for the body of the king to get to that funerary temple, it has to go through a causeway. And if you look to my right, all the way there, that is the city today. Today, the city of Cairo comes all the way to here. But at the time, back nearly 5,000 years ago, instead of the city, the Nile used to come all the way here during the flood season. And that's when the boats would come around, bring the blocks, and build this area. Now, that's also when the boat would come and drop the body of the king at the beginning of the causeway down there that leads it all the way up to the funerary temple and then into the pyramid, all the way into the burial chamber that we don't really know of yet. We haven't seen the mummy of the king inside any of these pyramids yet. None of the three pyramids that are here in the Giza plateau had any type of mummy wrappings or any mummies inside of them. So that remains a mystery. What happened to them? Were they robbed? Were they even ever here or not? And then if you look on the ground I'm walking on right now, this is limestone, because you would think that the pyramids area is desert sand, and that's all of it. But in reality, it's a mountain made of limestone, and that was the reason why they chose this spot, because it's a prime spot with a local quarry that they can dig the rocks up and instantly build the pyramid with it. Today is the beginning of the middle of the year vacations for schools. So if you look around, there are many Egyptians that have come here today to celebrate and to take pictures next to their great ancestors' buildings and ride camels and hopefully not fall or get bitten by one. They're scared of that camel. It's a bad idea. So, at this point, I would like to share a story with you. A story of how I got here and what made me study Egyptology. I grew up in Egypt. I was born here. I grew up all my life here. I love Egypt. It is my home, and I will never forget it. And my father did all the, he was the local producer for all of the documentaries for National Geographic and Discovery Channel, BBC, that are done about ancient Egypt. Let's cross this bar here and then get into the funerary temple of Khafre. Look at the pyramid right next to us. It's just a glorious building staring us in the eye. And right here, you could see how glorious this temple would have looked like 5,000 years ago. Now look at every one of these rocks. If you get close, look how big. Just the width of that rock. The width of that rock is bigger than me. 5 times, probably 5 meters long here. Twice the size of me on the side. It is massive. Weighs nearly 10 tons. and you try to think how they moved these blocks long time ago. It is mind-boggling. I don't have answers for you for all the questions I keep asking myself and you. Anyway, 6-year-old kid, me, running around in the same spot with my father, producing documentaries about ancient Egypt. It was a lovely thing to do. I loved doing it. I came all the time and I was always with him, and everyone knew us, and that's what we did. But when I was 11, I was left alone in the middle of the pyramids area to produce a documentary for, it was Discovery Channel, I think, yeah. And I was credited on it. I have to say I lied about my age at that time, but I was credited on it as a local producer at 11 years old, and that was the beginning. Since then, I worked with my father all the way through. We together produced at least 1,000 documentaries, and I'm not exaggerating. And every single one of them, we must have come here to the Great Pyramids and walk around. So this was like my second office for 20 years of my life, and I absolutely loved it. If you look straight ahead of me, right next to that camel's butt, you will see the back head of the Sphinx. Every time you come to the pyramids, whatever you expect, if you've never seen them before, you will look at them and you think, oh my God, that exceeded my expectations. And there are a few things in the world like that. Like, for instance, if you've never seen the Mona Lisa, it's smaller than you think. When I first went to Los Angeles and I looked at the Hollywood sign, I was very much underwhelmed. But I have to say, if you've never seen the Sphinx and it's your first time looking at it, at first sight, you will look at it and you'll be underwhelmed. It is not as big as you thought it was. In all the pictures, the Sphinx is right there with the 3 pyramids tiny behind his back. But that's perspective. The Sphinx is much smaller than the pyramids. Yet, it's still very impressive. And the only way you can know that is when you get deep inside next to the Sphinx where no one else is allowed. And thankfully, some great guy arranged a special permit so we could go inside and get where nowhere can go. Right now I'm walking on the ancient causeway. This is an ancient causeway that was built just for the king's body to move from the Valley Temple, right next to the Nile. The Nile would have been right there. Right next to the Nile, dragged all the way up the causeway to the funerary temple and into the pyramid so he can live forever in his house of eternity, the pyramid. This was all made of also limestone, just like every other part of the pyramid. And it's all from a local quarry. But then, while Khephren was digging up his pyramid, getting quarries from all around, making a quarry, taking the blocks from it and building his pyramid and his causeway, a massive pit was created. And unfortunately, it was created in the wrong spot, right at the end of his causeway. And he had to think, what can I do now? I have to make this belong. He left the main rock, the main hill in the center, and decided to sculpt it in a symbol to have in front of his pyramid, in a symbol of himself, to show the people how powerful he is. And that's why he created the Sphinx. The Sphinx is a body of a lion, which is the strongest animal. Everyone knows the lion is the strongest animal, and ancient Egyptians knew it too. It was the symbol of strength. And then the head of the Sphinx is a human, the most intelligent of them all, the Pharaoh. The head of that Sphinx was the Pharaoh Khephren himself. And the Pharaoh Khephren, because of his wisdom, becomes the symbol of wisdom and power and strength at the same time. Assalamu alaikum. Hello, hello. As we walk, one of the most fascinating sights in ancient Egypt is not one of the ones that look the greatest. Right on my right hand side, if you see that hill over there, right underneath that, that is the workman's village. And the workman's village is where we found so much evidence and so much proofs and answers to questions about how they build the pyramids. It's gonna get crowded with horses and horse poop, but you're just gonna keep walking straight through. The workman's village is where all the workers that worked on building this whole plateau, pyramids and all, lived during that time. The artists, and they all created their own little house with their own pieces of art. And the thing about ancient Egypt is that we have so much about the pharaohs of ancient Egypt. We have so much that has survived from the kings and the ruling party of ancient Egypt. But really, the one thing we lack so much on is how were the people of ancient Egypt, the normal people, the people like you and I just walking around. What did they do and how did they feel? Did they feel like life was fair? Egypt was a dictatorship in a way for the longest time. Every pharaoh was their god. They considered the pharaoh their god. I guess those kids don't love that story with the dictatorship. But how did the people feel at the time? Did they love being ruled that way? Did they love Egypt? Did they feel great? Were they treated badly? You don't know. السلام عليكم. السلام ورحمة الله. قشطة. ازيك يا ابن خالد؟ كله تمام. Good day. Come on in. He says have a good day, which means you should. السلام عليكم. This is the valley temple of Kefren. Remember, there's a funerary temple, a causeway that we walked on all the way down, and then this place is the valley temple, the temple that would have landed right next to the Nile, where the body would have landed the first thing right after its Nile trip. And one of the cool things here is the floor. It's alabaster, it's made of alabaster, it's beautiful. When it's polished, it's glowing like marble. And now all my hand is glowing like marble too because I touched it that way. And then this is the famous money pit that they now blocked. But everyone used to come and throw a coin here and make a wish. And then it seems like the wishes never came true. They closed it down. Now my favorite part of the whole walk is about to come. So just so you know, whatever I just said in Arabic is good morning, how are you doing, how's your family, how's your kids. It's so many questioning about how people feel all the time. Now we are right at the edge of the Pyramids Plateau, right at the edge of the city. This is the line between Giza and the city. And you'll see, and it's an advice for you too, that the closest restaurant to the Sphinx, if you want to get a great Sphinx picture, is KFC and Pizza Hut. The rooftop of Pizza Hut next to the Sphinx is a great place to get a picture. All the houses that used to be right here, they used to come even closer. But at some point, a problem happened. They found that some of these houses have dug underneath their own houses. And that they've found tombs underneath their own houses and didn't tell anyone about it. Started stealing their own antiquities and selling them. There are tomb raiders in their own houses, robbing tombs under their houses that no one knew about. But it's this close to the Sphinx. And remember, only 10% of Egypt has been found Everything else is still under the sand, which means anywhere underneath of us could be another mystery solved. صباح الفل يا عم سمير، ايه اللي كله تمام؟ كله تمام؟ One form of greeting in Egypt is that you have to kiss on the two cheeks. Man or woman, you have to use your cheek to kiss on a cheek and the other cheek. It's complicated sometimes, but you keep a smile on and you'll survive. Look at that. This is it. That's the Sphinx sitting right there in his might. Wow. You take a moment, go ahead of me and take a moment and just look at it. I'll tell you the stories later. Sphinx and 3 street dogs hanging next to the Sphinx and enjoying their fatherly figure, the Sphinx. Okay, so this Sphinx, when it was found, when it was discovered, which was during the French time, Egypt went through a French time about late 1700s. During that French time, we have pictures of how the Sphinx was discovered, and sand had covered it all the way to its neck. All the way to its neck was sand, and people would come with their camels and with their help, and they would walk right next to that head of the Sphinx, not knowing what's underneath, till they excavated, and then they found that the Sphinx is underneath of it. But there are pictures from back at the time, and they're absolutely glorious, where you are sitting right next to the head of the Sphinx. Now, if you look up at the Sphinx, take a look up there from this angle, you'll see that it's missing a nose. And no, it's not missing a nose because Khephren didn't have a nose, because he did. King Khephren had a nose, and that's his face. The nose went missing during a time. Actually, there's a whole story about how the nose went missing, and everyone in Egypt has a story. As a kid in school, they teach you that Napoleon came in and pointed his cannons at the Sphinx nose, and that's why the Sphinx nose was dropped off and he broke it. But that story was proven completely inaccurate, because in schools they didn't want to tell you the real story, which is a little bit offensive. It was an Islamic era of Egypt, which is anywhere between 1200 AD to, let's say, 1500 AD. During that Islamic era, some very conservative Islamist ruler, I'm going to tell you, really watch out during this area. There is a massive excavation underway to discover something new in the Sphinx. So you got to come through and don't hit the scaffolding, or else the Sphinx other nose will fall on your face. And I brought you here, I'm going to finish that story of the nose, but while we're there, look right here. This is part of a lot of mysteries and a lot of questions and a lot of theories. The tunnels underneath the Sphinx of Giza. Where they lead to and how far they go. And the answer to that is still unknown. No one knows how far those tunnels lead to and what do they actually lead to. There's theories about those tunnels going all the way to the pyramids, but no one really knows yet. And they are so tight that every time we try to excavate them, we have to get someone's kid to go inside with a little camera so we could see what actually is in there. Back to the nose. So, it wasn't Napoleon Bonaparte, it wasn't Napoleon, it was the conservative, fundamentalist Islamic ruler of Egypt that was unhappy believing that the Sphinx was a god figure that people were praying to, which is terrible, and infidels would do that, and he pointed his cannons at it and he blew it up, and all he could do was bring his nose down. Luckily, the Sphinx survived that mess, and we only lost the nose. Now, that excavation during the time of the French 300-ish years ago, when the Sphinx was covered in sand all the way to its neck, was not the first time in history that happened. The first time in history that happened was during the ancient times itself. And it's a piece of this Sphinx that always makes me think how long this ancient civilization was. Right here between the paws of the Sphinx, there is a stela, a tablet that tells a story. This story was about a king named Thutmose IV. You should keep walking while I tell you this story quickly. This story is about a king named Thutmose IV. Thutmose IV was a king in the 18th dynasty. It is a king that came during King Tut's time, which is nearly 1,000 years later. So think about it. He came 1,000 years later, still in ancient Egypt. The Sphinx for him was also an ancient ruin, just like for us. But in his dream he claimed, I had a dream and I saw the Sphinx head buried in sand, and the only thing that was visible was his head. And the Sphinx came to me in my dream and told me, come clear the sand around me and you will be the next king of Egypt. And he did it. He came to Egypt, he came to Cairo, he came to Giza, cleared the sand from all around the pyramid, which is the first ever recorded excavation restoration in the ancient world. They came over, he cleared all the sand and got the Sphinx clear from the sand, and the Sphinx made him the king. And that is a common story in ancient Egypt, that they would come up with a story about some type of a god that came to them in their dream, and hence he become the next king of Egypt. But this is it, my favorite spot, right between the paws of the Sphinx. Now your underwhelmed Sphinx feelings can go away, because you can see exactly what I mean by how glorious this Sphinx is. It's so special. So special, such a privilege to be able to be here alone between the paws of the Sphinx, and I hope you can feel that way. This is it. This is the end of our workout. Well done. This was a long trip and it was delightful. I hope you enjoyed it just as much as I did. I went on my endless stories, but I hope you liked it too. The next one is going to be great. We're going to travel through history, a couple of thousand years through history, and go in a time period of Egypt that completely changed the course of history that came afterwards. In one of the most hustling, bustling places of Cairo, Khan el-Khalili Market. You're gonna love that one. Stick around and you won't regret it. I'm Ramy Romany, your iFit guide.